Good afternoon from the EBRD annual meeting in Marrakesh. My name is Giampiero Nacci. I'm a director in the Climate Strategy and Delivery Group at the EBRD. We're here today to talk about the low carbon transition, and in particular about the role that materials play in this transition. In fact, in the context of building low carbon and climate resilience technologies, the world needs a lot of material, more than actually the world is producing today. Some of these materials are well known and are globally traded. Some are new and the related value chains are still under development. We are here to discuss this topic, a very diverse composition of experts, leading international experts, coming from research, business, and the policy space. Before we start, let me remind that this session is simultaneously translated in English and French. I'd like now to introduce one of the panelists who is going to set the context of this conversation and highlight some of the global challenges. So let me introduce to you Araceli Fernandez, who is the head of the Technology and Innovation Unit in the Energy Technology Policy Division at the International Energy Agency. And she's also leading industrial sector modeling and technology analysis. Araceli, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Giampiero. Good afternoon, everyone, all the distinguished guests and panelists as well. It's a pleasure really for me to join this event today and to provide some context setting for the interesting discussion that I think we will have in the next hour or so. So indeed, as Giampiero mentioned, a new global economy for the energy sector is emerging, driven mainly forward by policy action, technology innovation, and the increasing urgency as well of the need to tackle energy security concerns and climate change. There's no guarantee that the emergence of this new energy economy will be smooth, and it is not coming forward quickly enough, we think, to avoid the severe impacts from a changing climate and to alleviate as well urgent energy security risks. But it is already clear that tomorrow's energy economy promises to be quite different from the one we have today. An energy system powered by clean energy technologies differs profoundly from one fueled by traditional hydrocarbon fuels. If we think about the solar PV plants, the wind farms, electric vehicles that need to be built, all of those require more minerals than the fossil fuel-based counterparts. A typical electric car, for instance, requires 6 times the mineral inputs from a conventional car, and an onshore wind plant requires 9 times more mineral resources than what it would be needed for a gas-fired power plant. At the IEA, we develop a pathway towards net zero emissions by 2050 at the global level, and when we look at that outlook, we see that the global demand for these critical minerals rises rapidly. For example, the demand of lithium for use in batteries expands by a factor of 30 already by 2030, while the demand for rare earths, primarily used for making motors for electric vehicles, wind turbines, for example, as well, this would increase by a factor of 10 by 2030. Overall, by 2040, we see that the size of this global market for this type of minerals would approach the size of the coal mining market today. So in this new energy economy, the huge market opportunity for clean technology becomes a major new area for investment as well, and international competition and collaboration. Countries and companies jostle for position in global supply chains. In this pathway, as I've mentioned, looking at net zero by 2050, the combined size of the market for wind turbines, solar panels, lithium-ion batteries, electrolyzers, and fuel cells already represents a cumulative market opportunity worth around $27 trillion by 2050. Only batteries by themselves would account for 60% of that market size. So again, huge opportunity ahead of all of us. Reaching net zero emissions will also require low emission fuels. So we need new materials, we also need new fuels. Those energy needs cannot be easily, particularly those fuels would be required in those areas where those energy needs cannot be easily or economically be met by electricity. Low emission fuels today account only for 1% of the global final energy demand, and that share would increase to 20% by 2050 in this pathway. For example, just to put things in better context, both the amount needed and the production routes of hydrogen would change radically in such a pathway. The demand would increase almost by 6-fold in 2050, of which half would be used in heavy industries, mainly for steel production, chemicals production, particularly the fertilizer segments, and in transport. Another 30% would be converted into other hydrogen-based fuels, mainly ammonia for shipping, and also used in electricity generation. Also, synthetic kerosene could be used in aviation, and synthetic methane could be blended in gas networks. So again, important market for hydrogen-related fuels. By 2050, hydrogen production in that pathway would almost be entirely based on low carbon technologies. So it's not only about the size of that supply chain for hydrogen, but also transforming the way hydrogen is produced. Water electrolysis accounts for more than 60% of global production by 2050 in that scenario, and natural gas-based production in combination with carbon capture and storage would provide the remainder. Scaling up the deployment of these technologies and also the related manufacturing capacity for those type of equipment will be also critical to reduce as well the cost at which hydrogen, or low carbon hydrogen in particular, could be delivered. Increasing global demand for low carbon hydrogen provides a means as well for countries to export renewable electricity resources that could not otherwise be exploited. I think we will enter into this in the discussion, but of course, this is an important opportunity for Africa, and in particular for North Africa. We've seen similar options and opportunities in Australia, Chile, and the Middle East, as they are emerging as key exporting regions in such transition, benefiting from the low cost of production hydrogen from renewables or from natural gas with CCS. So indeed, just to emphasize that the opportunities are important, they are very big, both on the material commodity supply chains and alternative fuels markets. And I think this panel is very timely to discuss these opportunities, and particular in the context of the African region. So very happy to again join the panel, and I'll pass it back to Gianpiero to continue. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Araceli. This is quite impressive. You have really highlighted the perimeter of our discussions and the challenges and opportunities that, let's say, the sectors of raw materials is facing. Let me introduce the rest of the panel. We have here in Marrakesh, Giulia Maria Branzi, Head of Climate Policy at SNAM, who is one of the world leading energy infrastructure operator, and also one of the largest Italian listed company. We also have here Dr. Rashid Yazami, President of KVI, and an inventor with 150 patents, right, in different technologies, particularly associated to the battery value chains. He's also served as visiting professor in material science at the California Institute of Technology and Singapore's Nanyang Technology University. We also connected online Michal Zygmunt, Vice Chairman of Elemental Holding, a Polish company involved in the recycling and refining of metals, niche metals which are strategic for the low carbon transition. And Elemental is a client of the EBRD and is developing a recycling facility that is going to recover precious materials from car batteries, but also other metals containing waste streams. So let me start the conversation with Dr. Yazami. From what you heard from Araceli, you're in the right business, aren't you? So maybe focusing on emerging economies, and perhaps particularly focusing on Morocco. So how do you see the potential for countries like Morocco, particularly in the lithium value chains, where you are one of the leading international experts?
Well, thank you, Gianpiero. I guess everybody in this room has this kind of device, and this device has a lithium-ion battery inside that powers it. And if you are happy with your lithium battery, it's because of me, maybe. If you're not happy, it's due to Apple or Samsung or others. Yeah, I mean, of course, you can imagine that inside this battery there are materials, and for making the anode, the cathode, and the electrolytes, and all the component that enters into the composition of a battery. The reason why lithium-ion battery has become so popular is that's because they provide the highest energy for the weight of the battery. That's called energy density, and also for the volume. That's why our cell phones has become from this size in the 80s to the size that we have now in 2022, very small, very light, and very convenient. Now, since the inception of lithium-ion batteries in the early 80s and the commercialization in Japan in the 90s, early 90s, 1991, Sony was the first company to produce and commercialize lithium-ion batteries. It was for their device called the Walkman. I don't know if in the audience people will remember the Walkman. Yeah. So it was actually for mobile electronics, basically. And for the first 10 years, from 1991 to 2000s, it was mostly the market was driven by the mobile electronics. And then it spread to electric mobility and to energy storage and everything you can imagine that is powered by electricity will become electric with a battery inside, and the battery will be lithium-ion battery. Okay, that's unfortunately in the battery business there are not so many options, because I consider myself a battery as a miracle. It should not happen, because basically every time you charge and discharge your battery, it's like you build a building, you destroy it, and you build it again exactly identical. And you can do it thousands of times. It's really a miracle. So that's why there are very small amounts of batteries that are practical. Now, today, we have only lithium-ion battery that is developing very fast. And because of the, this transition in electromobility to electric cars, buses, trucks, boats, airplanes, drones, name it, okay, everything moving. There's high pressure on, of course, battery industry. And I think the Asians, like Japanese, Koreans, and Chinese, had a vision for at least the last 20 years, and they saw that there's an opportunity, so they dominated the market. And until now, it's still dominated by the 3 countries I named, and mostly China. They covered about 65% of the production. But fortunately, Europe has just wake up, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, say, oh, we produce cars, electric cars in Europe, but the batteries are made in China. This is a problem. So now, I heard today that Volkswagen has decided today to build 6 gigafactories like the ones of Tesla in Europe. So there's a huge trend. Now, it's good news and bad news, because the good news is that, yes, we are transiting to electric mobility. So in mega cities, big cities, there will be less and less internal combustion cars. There will be less pollution, less green gas, for the climate and so on. This is very good. The bad news is that we are not sure, as Jean-Pierre said, we are not sure that actually Earth will provide all the materials that are needed to produce the batteries. So at the beginning, we were talking about gigawatt hours a year. Like Tesla, there are 24 gigawatt hours a year. Okay, and in 2030, we are talking about 2.5 to 3 tera. So it's 1,000 giga. Okay, terawatt hours that has to be produced. It's huge. So you convert this to how many tons of cobalt, of graphite, of electrolytes, of separators, etc. Unfortunately, the production of cobalt today, or other nickel, manganese, and iron is okay. There will be a huge stress on these materials, which means that for the last, I would say, 20 years, the cost of lithium-ion batteries has dropped dramatically from $1,000 per kilowatt hour to below $100 per kilowatt hours. But because of the pressure on the materials, I am afraid that the next 10 years it will be, an increase in the dollars per kilowatt hours, which means that will be a barrier to developing electric cars in the future. So anyway, Morocco has many advantages, and that's why I'm advocating to have a gigafactory in Morocco, because that will be the first country in Africa to have it, and also maybe in the in the Arab world and so on. I think Morocco has the advantage of, number one, geography. We are very close to Europe, and we are in Africa. There is a huge market. And we have a free trade agreement with the United States, with Europe, and many other countries in Western Africa. That's very good for the market. We have also 80% of the world reserves of phosphates. And without phosphates, there's no batteries. That's number one. We have also cobalt, which is a key material. And BMW has signed a check like less than a year ago with a company here in Morocco called Panellists to make sure that they have the amounts of cobalt they need for developing their cars. So anyway, this is very good. Morocco has a strategic position, and there is, I don't know if you heard about Mount Tropic, which is a mountain, in the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean, not very far, like a few hundred kilometers from the shores of Moroccan Sahara. And this mountain contains more than maybe 30% of the cobalt that is now known. So there's huge pressure now, investments, opportunities actually to extract all these minerals from the ocean. I hope without polluting the ocean itself. It should be like taking into account, of course, the not only the economy but also the environment. Okay, very important. So anyway, lots of opportunities in Morocco, and I hope in the next couple of years we will hear good news that Morocco has entered this industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yazami. Very interesting. We'll come back later to address some of the challenges and opportunities you raised. Let me now involve Julia in this conversation. As SNAM, knows a thing or two about how to move, energy around, right? So, and I know that you're looking more and more into green hydrogen, green feedstock. Can you tell us a bit more about what are the plans of SNAM, and particularly in the context of the opportunities associated to North Africa?
Absolutely. Thank you, Giampiero. So just to give a bit of context of what SNAM does and the sort of perspective in the hydrogen space, as you said. So SNAM is the largest gas infrastructure operator, transport infrastructure operator in Europe, running over 33,000 transport pipelines in Europe and running 70 billion cubic meters of storage capacity out of the 100 billion cubic meter of storage capacity in Europe. So as a largest infrastructure operator in Europe, we've clearly looked at hydrogen, which is one of the ways we see we will be running the network into the future. So it's hydrogen and biomethane mostly. So we've been looking at North Africa in particular, well, both, of course, because of the proximity from a geographical point of view, and, of course, because of the potential that North Africa has in terms of the deployment of renewable hydrogen. So the main aspects are, in relation to North Africa, the cost of production of renewable power. If you look at, for example, Germany and North Africa, solar is 8 times cheaper if you produce it in North Africa as opposed to Germany. There is an advantage also in terms of flexibility. So because the production is more stable over the year, it requires less storage capacity. So it's a great source of opportunity for hydrogen development. Now, there are a number of barriers that needs to be addressed that we can discuss later on in the panel. But we do see North Africa as a key region, and as an infrastructure operator located in southern Italy, we do see ourselves as the bridge between the production of hydrogen and green molecules in North Africa and Europe.
Thanks a lot, Julia. Let me go now to Michal. We've been talking about the needs that the low-carbon transition entails, and been speaking about the big volumes that needs to be introduced in the market. But clearly, this transition makes sense only if we build strict criteria of sustainability and we produce this material in a responsible way. Can you tell us a bit more about these components? How we can ensure that material needs are really met, utilizing the best criteria in terms of responsibility and sustainability?
Yes, as mentioned before by Dr. Yazami, the volume of critical raw materials needed for this energy transition is huge. So we need to source a huge volume of scarce raw materials, but we need to source them responsibly. Since we are in the transition of economy to the circular model of economy, and we want to produce circular products, then we need a lot of raw materials, but we need to source them responsibly. Actually, the Elemental is a leader in recycling and refining of critical metals. However, when we look at responsible sources, we should consider two angles. One angle is primary production, so mining and production of virgin critical minerals. And here there are initiatives like responsible mining practices, which in some regions are voluntary and are initiated by business. In some regions, like in the European Union, there are some attempts to regulate this area. And the great product of this movement could be responsible mining standards or responsible mining charters, where we could have a certification and the OEM could distinguish responsibly mined and produced raw materials from the other ones. On the second angle, which is a secondary material derived from recycling, we have already a lot of regulation, especially in European Union, when in some sectors we have recycled content quotas, which impose on OEMs obligation to source raw materials coming from recycling, or we have OEM responsibility for recycling and for end of life of the product, which directly results in obligation to recycle the material and actually later on produce out of that raw materials for production, assuring responsible sourcing of raw materials. Another layer which is voluntary and which also leads to responsible sourcing are circular partnerships, where OEMs enter into partnerships, long-term partnerships with recyclers to assure that their end-of-life products will be actually recycled, but also to get access to raw materials which have 100% recycled content. Net zero initiatives indirectly also boost sourcing of responsible sourcing of materials, since they boost sourcing of materials from recycling. So we can see this movement both in mandatory sphere, regulation, which is OEM responsibility for recycling and recycling content quotas, and these voluntary schemes like responsible mining or circular partnerships. And continuation of that trend should assure responsible sourcing of raw materials. We are on a good way.
Thank you very much, Michal. Let me go back now to Araceli. We talked a bit about opportunities and what, let's say, the low carbon transition will offer to investors and project developers. Maybe let's shift a bit the focus on the barriers. I'd like you to explain your perspective, particularly when it comes to the infrastructure. Do you think that the current infrastructure system is fit for purpose? What are the bottlenecks?
Thanks, Giampiero. No, that's an important point. And actually, I mean, I think in a way, there's these two components of supply chain. So there's the infrastructure step, but also the supply side, as it was mentioned by the previous panelists, that tend to, in a way, have the longest lead times when we look at the different steps along supply chains. And this poses some particular challenges when it comes to this fast pace of expansion or development in some cases that would be needed, as we were discussing. So it's true. I mean, both steps along supply chains, both let's say infrastructure and energy supply will face these long lead times. On the infrastructure side, of course, getting to net zero emissions will require huge amounts of new infrastructure, lots of modifications to existing assets as well. Energy infrastructure needs to be transformed. Will need to be transformed in different regions as well, as all these different energy systems or domestic energy systems support that are supporting the use of fossil fuels today, and distribute this conventionally, let's say, generated electricity would turn into systems that could be mostly based on renewable electricity and low emission fuels. At the same time, rolling out large-scale infrastructure projects can easily take several years. and requires careful planning. So again, this could really pose an issue. If we think, for instance, of different types of enabling infrastructure, we think about electricity. So the rapid increase in electricity demand in such a, let's say, emission transitions, and the transition at the same time towards renewable electricity really both call for an expansion and modernization of electricity networks. And this could require indeed a sharp reversal in a way of the recent trends we are seeing that are actually going to declining investments in electricity grids. Tariff designs, permitting procedures, they all need to be revised to reflect these fundamental changes in the provision and the uses of electricity. If we think about the infrastructure more related to some of the alternative fuels, some of these low emission fuels that we're mentioning, for instance, if we think about biomethane or synthetic hydrogen-based fuels, some of them can make use of existing infrastructure without any modification. But if we think about pure hydrogen, then that's a different story. There we require really retrofits if we want to repurpose some of the existing fossil-based distribution networks. At the same time, another interesting component to think about is about industrial clusters. We think this about those in the broader sense, so including ports as well. This could really offer a good near-term opportunity if we think to build as well CO2 pipelines. When we think about the integration of carbon capture and for storage or utilization, these CO2 pipelines together with the hydrogen infrastructure could have a lot of synergies in this type of clusters, because various industries that are normally placed in this type of systems would really make a collective use of that new infrastructure. And this could really help alleviate some of the, particularly the initial risks. On the other hand, if we look at the upstream side of supply chains, getting back again on the supply of critical minerals, I fully agree, with the comments made by the other panelists. I mean, our analysis shows that really in the near-term outlook, components. On one hand, there's some minerals, we think about mine, lithium, cobalt, which are expected to be just in the very near term in slight surplus. But if we think about lithium chemical products, battery grade nickel, key rare earth elements, then we might very likely face a tight supply in the years ahead. If we look at the farther down in the future, then what we see, particularly if we really move ambitiously towards this, towards meeting these climate goals, we really see that the expected supply from existing mines and projects under construction would not be really able to cope with the demand coming up, and that could only be supplying a very limited part of the projected, let's say, lithium, cobalt, and copper needs by 2030 already. So again, important attention is needed in these two particular segments, where if the right investment is not put in place, the permitting is not accelerated, then we really will face bottlenecks in the transition.
Thanks a lot, Araceli. You just introduced a good point that I like to address with Julia, in fact. Maybe with a particular focus on green hydrogen, which is a building block of several low carbon sort of value chains, from steel to ammonia. Can we perhaps elaborate on the last point of Araceli, particularly in the context of the financial and regulatory barriers that you see, in order to, we need to address in order to really build well-functioning and liquid markets?
Yeah, thanks. So I was, raising before the opportunity associated with hydrogen, and especially in the context of North Africa, importing hydrogen from, which is produced in North Africa into Europe. But there are a number of barriers, as you say, that are financial, institutional, and regulatory that need to be addressed
in the lithium battery business in general. Because of the cost of lithium going up and maybe increasing by maybe 50% a year, there are more and more people, exploring lithium all over. And I heard recently in the border between Morocco and Mauritania, there is some lithium. And in Saudi Arabia, I just heard, so I'm going to Saudi Arabia this week just to see what are the prospects for extracting lithium. So this is all mining. Of course, it includes not only lithium, but other minerals that we need, definitely. And then other opportunities on all the applications of lithium batteries. So not only mobile electronics, which is still driving the market, electric mobility, which I mentioned, but also energy storage, clean energy. So in Morocco, we have Mazen that has a very ambitious clean energy production in Morocco. By 2030, they will reach a milestone of 8 gigawatt production, which is huge. So Morocco will export electricity to Europe. Okay, that's a good opportunity. Hydrogen also is there, and United Kingdom has shown some interest, in having the longest maybe hydrogen pipeline from Morocco to the UK. That's another maybe project that is on. Now, of course, after we use a battery, usually the lifespan of a battery is between 2-3 years to 10 years. Okay, 2021. Industry produced over 10 billion cells, batteries, okay? Which means that in 5 years and 10 years from now, we have to recycle all these batteries. And the projection is that in 2030, about 30% of materials that will be used in the new batteries will be from recycling batteries. It's huge, because actually a battery is the best mine for lithium and for cobalt, because you have high concentration there. But this is very interesting because we have to think about the cost. When you buy an electric car, you don't want to pay a premium for moving from internal combustion to electric, number one. Number two, you want when you you fully charge your battery, you will be able to drive for maybe 600 kilometers or more. That is the case now for internal combustion. But also, most important is, how can you charge your battery very fast? You go to a gas station, within 10 minutes, you fill your tank, and you have 600 kilometers like a range. Today, there is no such, technology. We have developed something, and it's we are talking to major companies in the world, in the United States, in Asia, to provide develop the ultra-fast charging stations for electric vehicles. And we have a technology that today enable us to charge a battery in 10 minutes, from 0 to 100% in 10 minutes. You never go to 0%, of course, in a car, you go to 20%, so if you go from 20 to 100%, it will be less than 8 minutes. Okay, that's mathematically the time, which is good. So, but there are always a devil hiding somewhere, because we have a technology that works, but where is the devil? Is it in the life of the battery, that we cannot keep it for 5 years to 10 years, or is it safety problem or something like that? So we have to deal with all of these aspects to bring these new opportunities. But it's there. I mean, basically, any company who will announce that they are able to fully charge a battery in 10 minutes, they will become multi-$10 billion company easily. So huge opportunities. It's something that's technology transfer from what's basically we do in academia, in basic research to development to commercialization and so on. And I feel, it's an Earth's problem. It's not only, in Europe, or it's everywhere. The trend is to go for cleaner transportation, and opportunities are huge. But now, of course, there are some limitations, as I said, like the materials, the mining. Are we able to produce enough lithium, enough cobalt, and so on, which I already mentioned. But also everything that is new. For instance, we heard like 2 weeks ago that a company has recalled over 100,000 electric vehicles because one of the vehicles caught fire. That's another big barrier. So safety of batteries is another open question at this time. Okay, so we don't know if there is something crazy about the battery and suddenly the battery catch fire. That happens. Fortunately, not very often. But if you produce 10 billion and you have 1 ppm, there's one battery out of 1 million that may have a problem, it becomes very big. I mean, 10,000 cases a year. So it's huge. So this is where actually the basic research and also industry have to work together. And of course, we need a lot of initiative to get funds and to continue our research to find solutions to the future of electric vehicles.
Thank you, Rashid. Michael, I would like to involve you again, particularly on this topic of how recycling industry can help really meeting the demand and the supply gaps in the market. So can you elaborate more? Your company is a market leader and definitely also a technology leader in this area. So how do you see the role of recycling in this context?
Yes, as was mentioned by other panelists, we will face a huge deficit of critical raw materials for this battery industry, green hydrogen manufacturing, and renewables. This 6 times more demand in 2040 estimated versus current level. We believe that without recycling, keeping the pace of growth of that technology is not possible. The deposits of this critical raw material will finish without recycling from 20 to 40 years, depending on the type of element we consider. So recycling is a must. It's actually, in the long term, the major supplier of material for these new technologies. What is expected that after 2050, from 60 to 80% of raw materials for battery industry and renewables will come from recycling. So number one is the response to limited supply of scarce raw material. But what's even more important, we believe that recycling in the long term is a tool to mitigate geopolitical tensions. We live in a world where mega powers compete for critical resources to develop technologies faster than their rivals. And it leads to actually the race for deposits and control of deposits of raw materials. Recycling allows to mitigate this tension. Actually, it allows for a fair access to raw material to all economies which will spend this single cost of first purchase of a pool of products and then use these products as an urban mine to actually have eternal own deposit of critical materials. So we look at this from the business case scenario as a great tool to satisfy this demand for raw materials long term and necessary element in development of these technologies. But on the other hand, as a great equalizing factor, allowing all economies to get equal access to critical raw materials sustainably in the future. So that's like a high-level view.
Thank you, Michael. Can you elaborate a bit more on the role of market instruments, carbon credits or other offsetting mechanisms, how they can help growing your industry?
When we look at the environment in which recyclers like we act, we can see here that the area for, let's say, three market forces. One is government, and here what we expect is to translate to regulation principles of circular economy. If we manage to identify regulation entirely responsible for recycling, just to make sure that recycling is necessary element of life cycle of every product, that the waste should be at the end reused or translated into new materials. So like it's like a role of authority, which we deem is necessary to create environment for circular economy. Then, following with that, with regulations imposing recycled content quotas, these fundamental principles create eco system for circular economy. So this is the role of government as we see it, just to translate these circular economy principles into legislation. Second is, what is very important is the role of financial institutions. And here, it's a great example of EBRD and the case of the project which we do together, where taxonomy principles, ESG scoring was applied to choose projects which are ESG friendly and focus on the projects which are ESG friendly. I mean, that kind of approach within financial institutions will help a lot to boost circular economy and to promote more ESG friendly projects versus the others. So it's the good practices already exist. What's probably worth to do is standardization to make it more common and transparent for the business, and then compete for funding based on these taxonomy principles. And the third pillar are voluntary schemes. And the great example here is voluntary carbon credit schemes. We believe that it's a great tool which actually allows businesses which reach technological limits in order to become carbon neutral, to actually buy credits from projects with a great emission avoidance potential. And thereby we create a situation where the older technologies, more or less circular economy friendly, will incentivize and will promote these pioneers of circular economy investing in these ambitious projects with high avoidance emission potential. And it's a great market instrument where we can see a transfer from the older technology, older economy, to the players of the new economy and more circular friendly projects. So when we combine these three pillars, like legislation and role of government, second, good practices of financial institutions, and third, voluntary schemes based on circular economy and carbon neutrality, we land with a very good ecosystem to promote brave circular economy friendly projects.
Thank you, Michal. Very interesting. I'd like to go back now to Araceli, particularly in the context of the role of technological innovation. To an extent, Rashid already touched upon this topic, but I'd like to hear your perspective.
Thanks a lot, Giampiero. Yeah, I'll make just flag a couple of points that I think will be complementary indeed with some of the comments that have been already raised in terms of how innovation in particular could help on some of the strategies around supply chains. That was mentioned, recycling was mentioned, reuse, even performance. We think as well that technology innovation can really help reducing material intensity, so the actual need of material in different technologies, and also could encourage material substitution, which can both play major roles in alleviating strains on supply while also reducing costs. We've looked at different examples of this in the past. So for instance, between 40 and 50% of reductions in the use of silver and silicon in solar cells over the past decades have already enabled a spectacular rise, as we saw in solar PV deployment. If we think about fuel cells to convert hydrogen into electricity, we've seen that they have been in production for many years, but the introduction of commercial passenger fuel cell electric vehicles, again, has spurred innovation to reduce the use of platinum to limit costs as well. Also innovation in the production technology, so in the manufacturing side, can also unlock sizable new supplies. So emerging technologies could really help on that front. Couple of examples, I mean, could be direct lithium extraction or enhanced metal recovery from waste streams or low-grade ores. So again, all these kind of techniques that try to make a more efficient use of the materials that are already in the stock could really offer the potential for a step change in the future supply volumes that, as we've been discussing, they are quite good. I mean, there's quite a lot of stress on them. If we think about hydrogen, because this is the other area we're discussing as well in the panel, and we think about the supply chain, except for well-established technologies for fossil-based production and convention of hydrogen in industry and refining, much of the hydrogen value chain is yet to be fully developed and at commercial scale. So it is therefore vital really that innovation efforts for all hydrogen technologies can really be stepped up. In some cases, we're talking about scaling up the specific capacity of equipment. If we think about electrolyzers, again, improving manufacturing techniques, also looking at synergies that have been developed in the battery industries, because we see a lot of synergies in all the electrochemistry related type of technologies, but also particularly on the use side of, so use technologies for hydrogen. And this is particularly important on the industry side in terms of heavy industries that could integrate more hydrogen. So this will be really relevant, we think, to avoid bottlenecks in making sure that those technologies can be used at the scale that will be required in this decarbonization transition.
Thank you, Araceli. I'd like to go back briefly to Giulia, particularly in the context of the operation of SNAM. You know, you connect, systems, so you rely on partnerships. Can you elaborate on the role of partnership in building the value chains, and what are the partnerships that are needed to scale up the system?
So as I was saying before, there are a number of moving parts that need to sort of come into conversion. So the partnerships would be around the financial aspects, would be around the institutional agreements around developing new routes of trade for hydrogen development, and would be around the policy, and regulatory aspects. So I suppose these three main areas. So these partnerships ideally should encompass members of the financial sector, institutions, and of the industry.
Thank you. I think we are getting close to the end of this session. But before we close, I would really like to have another, last round of interventions, and I would like to ask you to be very explicit and perhaps even outspoken. I'd like to hear from you in your specific area of activity, what you see as the main opportunity that you would like to pursue, and you're pursuing perhaps, but also the key barrier that you would like to be removed and addressed in the coming years. Rashid, you start.
Yeah, thank you.
I can see that you are eager to tell your story.
To speak like Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. I have a dream that actually the technology that I developed in with my group, research group in Singapore and also in Grenoble in France and other places in California you mentioned, that this technology comes to Africa, because I feel very African. And we have the technology that is working very well. And there is huge demand now from major companies in North America to implement this technology, which I'm happy to do. And also in Asia. But I feel a little bit too, I would say, too bad that this technology is there, ready, and we don't bring it closer to where it should be. It should be here in Morocco and also in Europe. Now that major car manufacturers in Europe, in Germany, France, Italy, and elsewhere, they are moving to electric cars, and we have this technology that can beat, we can charge a battery 3 times faster than Tesla today. We have it, technology is there. I just sent a report 2 days ago to this major company in America, say, hey, this battery, I can charge it in 15 minutes, and they will be using it in their application. That's fine. I have no problem with this. But this, I'm like sending a call. Everybody here can, contact me. I will be happy, to show what we have and see where I see the business growing in the future. We can do it in Morocco, export it to Europe, to elsewhere in the world. That's very possible. Again, I mean, part of the big advantages for Morocco is, number one, we have very smart engineers. And the example of Renault and the Peugeot in France, in Morocco, they are one of the best in the groups, for economics. And number two, as I said, we are close to Europe and so on, so this is very easy to do. And I can tell you within 18 to 24 months, we will be there in the market. So that's my call. So any person here or outside who are listening to this presentation, if you are any interest in these projects of ultra-fast chargers, please contact me. I will be happy to share the information with you.
Thank you very much. Araceli, I'd like to hear from you what you think is the big opportunity you would like to see removed in the coming years.
Thanks, Jean-Pierre. Yeah, no, so indeed, I mean, we've discussed that today's supply and investment plans for most of these critical minerals fall well short of what is needed to support this accelerated deployment of clean energy technologies. And so at the same time, I mean, many minerals come from a small number of producers. So we see that there's different parameters that provide, raise some hazards, some sort of risk. I mean, this high geographical concentration, these long lead times that we've discussed to bring new mineral production on stream, the decline in resource quality in some cases as well, and all the environmental and social impacts that we've touched on as well. So all of these raise concerns around the reliable and sustainable supply of minerals to support this transition. But even though these risks, let's say, or hazards are real, at the same time, they are surmountable. The response from policymakers and companies will really determine whether critical minerals could be a vital enabler of the clean energy transition or become a bottleneck for the pace of the transition. So it's really a matter of incentivizing the required investments flowing into those areas where it is mostly needed, and certain international collaboration and partnerships will be critical in this regard, given the international nature of the supply chains we have discussed. We at the IEA plan to do a deep dive in this type of considerations and analysis this year, as we're working on our upcoming edition for the energy technology perspectives that will be published in the fall, around October this year, and it will focus on clean energy technology supply chains for net zero. So we're really looking forward to keep the discussion going and to kind of exchange again on these topics moving forward as well. And just to thank you as well for the invitation, and a pleasure to join the panel with the other colleagues.
Thank you very much, Araceli. Michal.
From our point of view as recycler, there are two major barriers which we would like to have eliminated. One barrier is, I would say, a rather expectation connected with this circular economy, circular product approach. We would expect to have not only in Europe, but also in other geographies, direct responsibility of the manufacturer for recycling of its product. We live in an era where the consumption is a lifestyle. Plenty of billions of tons of products are produced every year, changed, bought new, but not everybody thinks about recycling of the end-of-life product. So we believe that clear connection of responsibility for recycling with manufacturing of the product is the solution, global solution for the problem of waste. And then it creates an ecosystem for recycling, reuse, and taking care for waste. So extending of this OEM responsibility for waste to other geographies would allow, in case of batteries, would allow to build a global battery recycling solutions, but it doesn't concern only batteries. Second is data sharing with OEMs. In case of battery, it's a very complex device. End-of-life battery can be a dangerous device. It's electrical device, it's chemically active. So we need to have data sharing with manufacturers to allow safe and smooth recycling. So far, manufacturers treat this data as a commercial secret technology advantage. So we need to introduce standards of data sharing to allow smooth and safe recycling. So these two barriers would help a lot to develop recycling and take care for waste.
Thank you very much, Michael. Julia, your view.
Yes,
in 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds, I think the time for green gases is now. So they, with the current situation on gas prices, they become more competitive, and it's a matter of putting together all the sort of moving parts I was mentioning before. So the sort of wish is really that there is a coordination enough and institutional will enough to enable this to happen.
Thank you very much. Julia, Rashid, Michal, Araceli, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking you for these very interesting interventions. Thank you.
Thank you.